Picture yourself standing in a crystal spire that stretches beyond the clouds, watching 10,000 worlds die in a single heartbeat. The air tastes of jasmine and terror as psychic screams race through the webway faster than light itself. Every soul you've ever known, artists, poets, lovers, their essence torn away like silk in a hurricane. This is the moment the Elder Empire didn't just fall, it was devoured from within by something they created without ever meaning to. A newborn god, hungry and terrible, feeding on the very perfection they'd spent millions of years cultivating.
How do you accidentally create a god?
By forgetting that even paradise can rot if you let it sit too long. The Eldar had conquered death, disease, even boredom itself. They'd built an empire that spanned the galaxy's heart, where every desire could be fulfilled with a thought. But when you have everything, the only frontier left is sensation itself. And that's where the real horror begins. To understand how the galaxy's most beautiful civilization became its most cautionary tale, we need to step back to when the Eldar first inherited a silent universe. After the war in heaven ended, the galaxy lay broken and empty. The old ones were gone, the star gods were splintered, and the Necron slept. From the ashes rose the Eldar, graceful, psychic, seemingly perfect. They inherited the mantle of leadership from the old ones, and with technology that made reality bend to their will. Imagine living for thousands of years in bodies that never aged, minds that could touch the warp itself, surrounded by art so beautiful it could make you weep just by existing. They built crystal cities that sang in the solar winds, gardens where thoughts bloomed into living sculptures, ships that sailed between dimensions like poetry made manifest.
That sounds like paradise.
It was. For millions of years, the Eldar crafted wonders that would make our greatest achievements look like children's finger paintings. They had no enemies, no disease, no death unless they chose it. Every Eldar was an artist, a philosopher, a master of sciences we can't even comprehend. They shaped worlds like clay, wrote symphonies in pure emotion, and danced between the stars as if the universe itself was their stage. But perfection has a price, and paradise has a poison hidden in its heart. The problem with having everything is that eventually, everything becomes boring. When you've mastered every art form, explored every philosophy, experienced every pleasure the universe has to offer, what's left? The pathless, they called themselves. Eldar who'd grown tired of conventional beauty, conventional meaning, conventional limits. They started as artists pushing boundaries, asking what if where others asked, why not just enjoy what we have? The first pleasure cults weren't evil. They were curious. They wanted to explore sensation as an art form, to find new ways of experiencing existence.
What kind of sensations?
At first, subtle things, tastes that didn't exist in nature, colors that had no names, music that could only be heard by the soul. They built amphitheaters where a single note could last for years, where audiences would sit in perfect rapture, feeling every harmonic as if it were painting new emotions directly onto their hearts. They crafted wines from crystallized starlight, perfumes that smelled like forgotten memories, silk that felt like touching the concept of softness itself. It seemed harmless enough, just another form of artistic expression in a civilization built on artistic expression. But like all addictions, it escalated. The pleasure cults spread from world to world, each one trying to outdo the last in terms of pure sensory experience. They built palaces that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, hosted festivals where time itself moved to the rhythm of the music. Every sensation had to be more intense, more perfect, more overwhelming than the last. The air in their cities grew thick with psychic energy, shimmering with colors that hurt to look at directly. You could taste the excess on your tongue, sweet and cloying, like honey mixed with madness.
Were the other Eldar worried?
Some were. The craftmasters, the old traditionalists, could feel something stirring in the warp every time the cults gathered. Every festival, every orgy of sensation sent ripples through the immaterial realm. But the Pathless had an answer for everything. We're exploring new frontiers of consciousness. We're pushing the boundaries of what it means to be alive. And how do you argue with that when you're immortal beings who've run out of everything else to discover? The festivals grew larger, more elaborate, more consuming. What had started as art was becoming something else entirely. The Farseers saw it first, glimpses of a future too terrible to speak aloud. They tried to warn their people, showing them visions of what was growing in the dark spaces between thoughts. But who listens to prophets of doom when you're living in paradise? Some of the wisest among them made a choice that saved their souls. They fled. The craft worlds, great world ships built like living cities, detached themselves from the webway and sailed into the void, carrying those Eldar who still remembered that some prices are too high to pay.
They just abandoned their homeworlds?
Can you imagine what that took? Leaving behind everything you've ever known, everyone you've ever loved, to live as refugees among the stars. The craft world Eldar chose exile over ecstasy, austerity over abundance. While their cousins in the core worlds danced ever deeper into madness, the exiles meditated on ancient paths, practicing restraint in a civilization that had forgotten the word. They watched from afar as their people's celebrations grew brighter, louder, more desperate, and felt the galaxy itself begin to tremble. What had started as pleasure-seeking mutated into something far darker. The cults began exploring pain as intensely as they'd once explored joy, death as passionately as they'd once embraced life. Murder became performance art, torture became symphony, and the screams of the innocent became just another instrument in the ever-expanding orchestra of sensation. They told themselves it was still art, still exploration, still pushing boundaries. But in the warp, something was listening to every scream, feeding on every excess, growing stronger with each atrocity.
The Eldar couldn't see what they were creating?
How could they? They were drunk on their own perfection, blind to everything except the next sensation, the next high, the next boundary to cross. The few who tried to warn them were dismissed as relics, ancient voices from a boring past, trying to drag them back to mediocrity. Meanwhile, in the immaterial realm, emotions were crystallizing into something with consciousness, something with hunger, something that looked upon its creators and saw not artists, but appetizers. The warp itself was changing, taking on new colors, new hungers, and a new terrible purpose. The last celebration, that's what the survivors would later call it. Every Eldar world, every space station, every pleasure palace, simultaneously hosting the greatest festival in galactic history. Billions of Eldar lost in ecstasy so intense it bordered on madness, their psychic emanations creating storms in the warp, that could be felt from one side of the galaxy to the other. Reality itself grew thin, the barrier between material and immaterial, wearing gossamer fine under the pressure of so much concentrated sensation.
They had no idea what was about to happen.
None. They danced as the universe held its breath, sang as creation itself prepared to scream. In the warp, something vast and terrible was taking its first conscious breath, opening eyes that had been forming for millennia in the dark spaces between desire and fulfillment. The pressure was building to a breaking point that would remake the galaxy forever. And still, the Eldar danced. Picture that moment. 10,000 worlds of perfect beings lost in perfect ecstasy, and then the universe screams, not with sound, but with pure psychic agony, as something newborn and hungry tears its way into existence. Slaanesh, she who thirsts, opened her eyes for the first time and reached out to embrace her creators. Every Eldar soul was ripped from its body in an instant, drawn screaming into the maw of the god they'd accidentally birthed. The core worlds collapsed into the warp, becoming what we now call the Eye of Terror. Even the gods themselves weren't safe. The Eldar pantheon was torn apart, devoured by this newcomer who claimed dominion over sensation itself.
Did any survive?
The ones who'd fled, the exiles on their craft worlds, they felt the birth scream, but survived it. Protected by distance and discipline, they watched their entire civilization vanish in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Some say you can still hear it if you listen carefully, the echo of 1 trillion souls crying out in perfect, terrible harmony as they were consumed by their own creation. What remained were fragments scattered across the galaxy. The craft world Eldar, forever wandering among the stars, walking the narrow path between emotion and madness. The dark Elder of Comora, who fled into the webway's darkest corners and learned to feed on others' pain to keep their own souls safe. The Exodites, who'd chosen simple lives on primitive worlds and thereby escaped the worst of the catastrophe. All of them haunted by the knowledge of what their people had become, a cautionary tale written in psychic fire across the galaxy's heart.
And that's where their story ends?
Their golden age, yes, but endings are often beginnings in disguise. The birth of Slaanesh didn't just murder an empire, it changed the galaxy forever. The psychic storms that had isolated so many worlds began to calm, and on a little planet called Terra, something ancient and powerful was finally ready to make its move. But that tale of rising from darkness will have to wait for another night, when we speak of how the galaxy's youngest children learned to claim the stars their predecessors had abandoned.
If you want to learn more about the Warhammer 40k universe, subscribe and check out the links in the description to read up on the Eldar.